What's happening, everyone? My partner's Ian's keeping it real. What's happening, everyone? And welcome to Al Chile Boxing Talk. Got the homies, George from Off the Ropes Boxing and MMA, the
What's
hired
going
gun
on? Yep.
of Al Chile. We got Run PMC, man. We got one hell of a show for you, man. And, if you're here, you probably saw the headline, my thumbnail, a shameless thumbnail. I've noticed there's been all kinds of like clickbaity type headlines lately. And I thought, well, I'm going to get in on the fun and talk about how 50 Cent stepped to Jake Paul. I don't know if stepped is the right thing these days. Does anybody know?
Nowadays, yes.
Okay, so he stepped to him, but that didn't really happen. It's just bullshitting. But there are some relevant things that we're going to talk about because we're going to be talking about Jake Paul and his influence in boxing, as well as 50 Cent. We're going to be talking about him as well because there are some parallels. So we're going to get right into it. And let's talk about it, man. We're going to talk about who is Jake Paul. George, off the top of your head, tell me, if I mention Jake Paul, what do you think these days?
Immediately social media is like first thing that sticks out to me, obviously. There's so much about him, right? Social media, and if you look a little bit into him, he was a Disney kid. Influencer, I guess you could say. That's pretty much if anybody's gonna ask me like who's Jake Paul, like, hey, look, he's a professional influencing boxer, I would say in a nutshell.
Hey, man, that's about what I got, too. And I want to give a shout out to JC in the house first. Welcome, man. Nando Yamas second. He says, yo, salutes to the HCP panel and the chat. HCP, you're damn right. And, George, I think that's how I viewed it, too. Like, when I think about Jake Paul, the first time I kind of really knew about him was the first time I even heard of him, I think, was when his brother found a dead body and he recorded it on YouTube. And this was years ago. And then I came to learn that Logan Paul was this YouTube star for the younger generation, and that he had a brother named Jake Paul. And then I really didn't know much about him until they started boxing. But, we're a little bit older, like Run. Did you know much about the Paul brothers before they got into boxing?
I think I'm a little bit younger than you guys, so I knew more about them, but it was more of just as YouTubers that they just vlog their life. So just tape what they're doing during the day and sometimes do outrageous things. I was never one to watch them, but I had people that I knew that watch them or subscribe to their YouTube channels, and that was probably 2015 through 17, so a little bit a while ago. But it was just more of these guys are just YouTubers that are just vlogging themselves living their life in Los Angeles. So that was about it.
Yep. And that's about what the wiki says. It says he's an American social media personality and professional boxer. He initially rose to fame on Vine before playing the role of Dirk Mann on the Disney Channel series Bizaardvark for 2 seasons. And so, on top of that too, this is a Forbes article here on the right, and it's basically talking about how he makes about $45 million a year estimate. And it kind of shows that he's more of a YouTuber than anything else. So if you don't know, he's more of a YouTuber now than anything else. But what I find interesting is he's not really uploading that much anymore. I think that he's kind of made a transition, but it's showing here. And if you read towards the bottom, that he makes most of his money off boxing now, up to nearly 90% of his earnings. So to me, it seems like there's a little bit of a transition for the Paul brothers in general. And, that wouldn't surprise me. From what I can tell, there's a lot of youth obsession in general towards social media. And they don't really have a place, and so, it made me think about well, what is famous? What do I consider to be famous? And Run PMC and I were talking about what is famous? Because you can also be a famous social media influencer, but for everybody to know you, that's a bit different, and it really caught my eye when we were watching the Super Bowl because there were a lot of celebrities in the commercials. Did you guys have a chance to check those commercials out or the Super Bowl in general out?
Oh yeah, there was. So it's very true. You know what? I was just thinking that I think when the cable guy commercial came on, I'm like, well, damn, there's so many celebrity commercials. With so many celebrities that are in these commercials, what is I don't know, agenda, if you want to call it, or whatever it is. But yeah, man, every commercial, it was a celebrity in it. I think my favorite one was the Jones one with the Toyota. And I think his name is Nick Jonas. So every Jones was in a Toyota Tundra, and then some random fourth Toyota pulls up, and they look, and then I forgot her name, but she's a comedian. She came out in Ghostbusters. She looks at him, she's all Jonas, and it was pretty funny.
Yeah, I saw that one. I was kind of in and out, but I know that one. Like the ones that caught my eye, and it's funny too because I was talking to Run PMC about like, well, what is famous? I was in agreement with him that back in the day there used to be bigger stars in general. Like I don't think there are like box office superstars like there used to be. Like when you and I were younger, George. Like Jim Carrey. Like dude, that guy was famous. Like when he was doing the Ace Ventura, The Mask. Like everybody knew who that dude was. If he had a movie coming out, you'd go see it, right? Same with like Will Smith during like the Men in Black days, right? Or Michael Jackson. Like people forget that dude was like really famous. Like I think that there is just like a saturated market of just what is considered to be famous these days, and it's not even through film and media and music alone. Like it's also through social networking and the YouTubes and the Instagrams. Like it's all over the place. You know what I mean? So it's hard to stick out. But you could see for the Super Bowl, for what we consider to be mainstream media, all tuning in at the same time. Then with like bona fide celebrities, like I know who Lindsay Lohan is. I could tell who that. I don't know his name, but I know that guy's on SNL. Scarlett Johansson.
Oh yeah, that's her husband. I forgot. I think his name is Colin. I think his name is Colin something.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Mike Myers. You know what I mean? So, Ron, do you have any opinion on this stuff, man?
Yeah, I watched the Super Bowl. I didn't really watch the commercials that closely. The one that I saw that I recognized most people in was obviously the Dr. Evil Austin Powers one with the cars. And then yes, exactly. And then also when they were all bowling and you had all the athletes from the different sports bowling and when they're in the bowling alley. But yeah, I mean, these are definitely what I would consider, like you said, bona fide celebrities. Like everyone, they eclipse generations, right? It's like different generations know exactly who they are, whether it's from them being in movies or it's just from them being the character that they are. Like when I think about like some guys, it's like if you think about Jim Carrey, he plays a character in movies, but he's sort of playing himself in a way. And then it's also, you see, like if you talk about like Adam Sandler, even though his movies are more of they're just Adam Sandler movies, he's playing himself just with different names. So but I would consider those people like legitimate celebrities. Like everyone knows who LeBron James is even if they don't watch basketball, like that type of thing. Whereas like I don't know if everyone knows who Jake Paul is past like age, like maybe like 30, 35, right? I don't think like some people might not know.
Wow, Run. Wow. Anyways, go ahead, man.
No, but that was it. I mean, I would say just there's definitely there's a difference between a bona fide celebrity and someone that's a social media star. And I don't think always, especially with how many bots there are, whether if you read about like there's bot farms on social media where they're just fake accounts, you just don't know if they're like if their following is really legitimate too. And even if you look at like projected net worth, like some of those are severely undershot and some of them are um, overshot. So no one truly knows except the person.
I mean,
Absolutely.
that's a great point. I've always thought that some of these numbers could be inflated and their sphere of influence could be exaggerated. And here, Jake Paul had a tweet during the Super Bowl. He says, "Screw it. If Rams win the Super Bowl, I'm giving one person 10,000 who likes and retweets this tweet. Must be following me and Simple Bet HQ so we can DM you if you win. Go." And I was reading some of the retweets and some people were like, "Hey, maybe you could help me out because I'm in need." It kind of got really weird. A lot of people were just like, "Well, why don't you do something meaningful with that money?" Kind of awkward, But hey, look, check out my cat. What do you think? Hey, if Maestro can have a cat, I can have a cat.
Hey, I got two of them.
Yeah. This is just one. This is Cosmo.
No, nice.
Photo bombing, and so yeah, dude, like Jake Paul wasn't really involved in the Super Bowl, but he did have something to say about the commercials. He says he's going to manifest it that he'll be in a Super Bowl commercial next year. Just watch, speak it into existence, put in the work, perform, and the magic happens. So, I mean, even he knows that's where it's at for celebrity status, right? I mean, they were showing all the celebrities that were at the Super Bowl. Celebrities were in the commercials, but I mean, a Jake Paul, like, I'm not even sure really where he fits anymore. And in my opinion, like I mentioned earlier, I think he's making a bit of that shift. Like if you go to his YouTube, which is where he has his most followers, he has about 20 million followers. And I did some research on the top YouTubers, most subscribers, and he's not in the top 100. Once you start getting towards like 70 to 100, it's all around that 30 million mark. And it's just a shit ton of 30 million subscribers, ranging from anything from like lifestyle to reaction type videos. Like, oh, I'm going to listen to this old song and react to it, to a lot of comedian lifestyle vloggers, a lot of South Americans I was surprised to see, and then I also put some other things into perspective too. Like some people are making it seem like Jake Paul is really good for boxing in general. And I just wanted to see what you guys thought about it. He's now a boxer as well as a promoter. And some people think he's doing really well. Some people still don't know what to make of it. And I wanted to get your guys' take on it. Like, off the top of your head, like, what do you think about Jake Paul and his sphere of influence in boxing overall?
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, man, I think I was in the majority with everybody in the beginning. After him doing the YouTube fights, and everybody's calling for like, yeah, no, put him in the ring. Give him, the top guy. Give him this guy. Give him that guy. But if you just look at it as what he is, he was a YouTuber. He's an influencer. He's just recreating, a following. He wants people to check him out, and he knows he has a big following in the younger crowd, and that's exactly how it was. And in his pay-per-views, and same thing for his brother. I mean, if we're gonna say the numbers were so high, like on the streams, I'm gonna say about an 80 to 90% of it were the young people that are on YouTube that really don't know boxing, but they're like, oh shit, well look at Jake Paul's fighting Tyron Woodley. Oh, Tyron Woodley was a former UFC fighter, and the same thing with his brother. Oh, but look at his brother. He's fighting Floyd Mayweather, the I guess considered one of the best fighters of all, the greatest of all time, or TMT, the what he calls himself. So I think that's where it goes with that is it catches your attention. But in the beginning, I was with everybody. I was like, man, come on, like, okay, cool. You want to box? If you want to take it serious, take it serious. Let's of course. I agree. Let's see him fight a professional fighter. I wasn't calling for a top 10 or even a top 20 guy. I think everybody wanted to see where they gauged him and if he was taking it that serious. But as time gone on, and you hear people around his camps, people that know him personally, they're like, look, you know what? Don't let the YouTube thing fool you. Like, he really is like a genuine cool guy. Like, he really donates money. He really is trying to help other people out. We see him like we think him as a brat, like some bratty kid that's just spoiled, and that just wants attention. But yeah, the attention comes with it. But I like the person that moves in silence behind behind the scenes, when you don't see him trying to like, hey, look at I went to this homeless guy at the gas station. I just gave him $10,000. Not saying that's what he did, but like you see some of those videos on Instagram, social media, Twitter, where I don't know if people are doing it out of the genuine out of their heart, but for him to do that, and then of course with Serrano here, he was pushing for her to be on his undercard as the co-main event on the Showtime card. That was a little bit what I was reading, is he was pushing for it, and he actually went to the executives of Showtime, was like, look, she's going to be my co-main event. And then to top it off, he split $1 million, $1 million from the first fight with Tyron Woodley. He gave everybody, like an extra 50,000, 200,000 on top of whatever they made. So he gave him a little bonus, man. And I mean, if he's doing good, for the sport, I guess as long as he stays where he's at, I guess if he's gonna fight, he's gonna fight. But I think, like most of us, we want to see him actually at least fight somebody in the top 30 or 50. See where he really stands with like a real true boxer, because we know boxing isn't just about throwing hands. It's knowing how to walk the ring. Like you can see people that can control the ring without even throwing a punch. Is just all in the footwork, man. And we want to see how he can handle that. And I was actually looking forward to him fighting Tyson Fury's nephew or brother. I forgot his name already.
Tommy Fury.
Yeah, Tommy Fury.
Also a celebrity from I think he has Big Brother fame, UK Big Brother fame.
Oh yeah, it's like, I think it was. Oh yeah, you're right. I don't know what it was, but it was kind of like a dating show in the UK, and it was really
maybe it is dating. It's something he's put on screen to be famous. I mean, yeah, you're right. Reality TV. Something in there.
Absolutely.
I know Amir Khan was getting down on that a little bit too. Like, help, I'm on an island and I'm a celebrity or something like that. And hell, I guess. Ron, what do you think about all this, man?
I mean, I'm still sort of, I guess, on both sides of this. I see Jake Paul. I mean, obviously he's doing great things for Amanda Serrano's career, but it's like, is it going to expand more to other boxers where he actually makes a change, or is this just a way for him to just make money and that she's going to be in and out in a few years, or is he going to stick around for a decade or at least 5 years just to see actual change take place? Because it's like, if you're just in here for a few years and you're just going to hop to the next thing, maybe not. But I guess it sort of depends on how Serrano does in the Taylor fight, and just to see if it's worthy for him to keep going. And then I think Manny from Long Live Boxing touched on also, which I think is important, that Jake Paul is I guess he's a resident of Puerto Rico. I guess he's established residency there, so there's no capital gains tax there. So he might be, his promotional company might be incorporated in Puerto Rico too. So that might be another thing. This might be a business decision he's making, and having probably Puerto Rico's one of their top boxers in the game right now, that being Amanda Serrano, in his promotion. That's only going to help his business. So we'll see. I mean, I don't think like legitimate boxer. I don't think so. Not just yet. But I know a lot of people disagree. But I think starting off against the guys he started off with isn't much different than a lot of guys when they start off as earlier in their career. I know people in HCP are on both sides of the fence on this one. I tend to agree with that. Fighting even the two UFC guys, um, then also fighting. I mean, Nate Robinson doesn't count, and the YouTuber doesn't count, but having three of his fights be legitimate in his first five, legitimate in the sense that they are combat athletes, I think that's decent. Whereas you see Clay Collard was a UFC fighter, boxer, and he was people are putting him up during the pandemic year 2020 being fighter of the year, sort of jokingly, but sometimes not as jokingly, because he's defeating undefeated prospects. But it's like this guy's like a part-time coach slash MMA fighter slash boxer. And then one of Beck the Bully's big wins was against Clay Collard. And so it's sort of an interesting take where it's like you're fighting a guy they're promoting Clay Collard as like this rocky story, whereas you have guys that were much higher in the sport that Clay Collard was originally in, that being UFC or MMA, fighting Jake Paul. It's just sort of an interesting thing that it's like they're promoting Clay Collard as this guy that's toppling these undefeated guys, whereas Jake Paul just started boxing 2 years ago or 1.5 years ago and is beating former champions in the UFC, which is the pinnacle of MMA. So I know it's not boxing, but it's just a way to look at it. But I don't know. I mean, time will only tell what his true intentions are. But I think so far, I think they're net positive. But I mean, it just depends how far he wants to branch out.
I hear that. And dude, Remy's dropping some facts here. If y'all aren't subscribed to Remy, man, that guy makes great highlight videos. And he says top Instagram influencers get $1,500 per post. Damn. Hey, Remy, welcome, man. Did you see my shameless thumbnail, bro? I'm trying to get that money. I'm trying to see if the Jake Paul followers come in, and if they like the drama that I created between him and 50 Cent. So we'll see if anything pops out of that. And then he also says that Ryan Garcia, who's somebody else I want to talk about, he gets Instagram money daily. And that's the other thing, too, as far as Jake Paul being famous, like I'd have to say, well, if we consider him famous, then we need to consider other social media influencers famous, like Ryan Garcia, who has his own demographics. They might be a little different, maybe like a different age range. And I know that Ryan Garcia has less Instagram followers than Jake Paul does, but he still has an audience, and a lot of people have audiences these days. And I agree with both of you. Like, Jake Paul, I would consider him to be positive for boxing in a way, as long as he wants to be. How long will he be here? I think that remains to be seen. I do think it's kind of gimmicky. Like, I've not seen anything that makes me think that Jake Paul's special. Like, he brings his demographic, or whoever he brings, his followers, he brings their attention towards boxing. But I think any celebrity can do that. And it'll only work for so long, in my opinion. In my opinion as well, I think that we've already seen this a little bit. And I wanted to make some parallels between Jake Paul and 50 Cent, because 50 Cent tried it as well. And if you're my age, like me and George, we kind of, and Run PMC to an extent, like we kind of remember when 50 Cent made his entry into boxing and he used his celebrity status. And I remember vividly, like, people were falling all over themselves that 50 Cent was a promoter, especially the media. They loved getting interviews with him, taking pictures of him with his fighters. Like, it was a big deal back in the day. It really was, but he faded out, right? He had some fighters and it didn't work out. And then Run, you said you had some information. We were kind of talking a little bit about this. You tried to get something going with Floyd Mayweather, right?
Yeah, that was the start of it. Is that leading up to Floyd Mayweather's fight against Miguel Cotto? Obviously, 50 Cent and Floyd were friends like for a long time leading up to that, where he walked him out for the Oscar De La Hoya fight when he was wearing the bulletproof vest for that, and then leading up to his fight with Cotto before Floyd was going to be incarcerated, they were coming up with what was before Mayweather Sports, or not before they became Mayweather Promotions, a legitimate company. Floyd Mayweather and 50 Cent were going to come up TMT Promotions, and then the Money Team Promotions. And 50 Cent says he's the one that came up with the name, which is sort of funny since that's like Floyd's like I don't know if it's a moniker, but like his sort of entourage's name is the Money Team. But and then he started signing fighters because he fronted. I think it was I think it was either hundreds of thousands of dollars or over $1 million of his own money to start this company in Nevada and to sign fighters and give them bonuses. This is just me, just from what I remember. And I remember he signed a fighter that was fighting for, or he was being trained by Jeff Mayweather at the time, Celestino Caballero. He signed Zab Judah. He signed Billy Dibb. He signed Euricus Gamboa. And then he signed Andre Berto. And I think Berto, I don't know if they're going to do a co-promotion with him and Lou DiBella. And then shortly after that, he also signed Andre Durrell. And then a few years after, he signed Jean Pascal. But so 50 Cent fronted this money. And then when Floyd Mayweather came out 3 months after he was in jail, he said, "Oh, that's you shouldn't have fronted the money. We weren't really wanting to move that quickly." And then he sort of backed out of the deal. So the 50 Cent changed it shortly to SMS Promotions because SMS was his headphone company. So that's what it been. Then he signed James Kirkland, and it obviously dissolved. But that was sort of the thing. And then him and Floyd Mayweather were beefing over it. And then I don't know if this was just to get back at Floyd Mayweather, but he made Floyd Mayweather Sr. the head trainer of the SMS boxing team briefly before he reunited with Floyd when he signed the Showtime deal. So it was all just sort of just a messy situation. That then 50 Cent sort of hanging on to that beef now when he every few years or a few months when he mentions Floyd Mayweather's name and then says he can't read or whatever. But that was sort of the root of it from what I remember.
George, what do you remember about 50 Cent's stint in the boxing world? Were you paying attention at the time, man? And was it a big deal to you when he entered the promotional game?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, of course I paid attention because right around the time Floyd, of course, was the big pay-per-view star. 50 Cent. I'm not saying he's not irrelevant now, but even then he was still considered like a peak rapper or just an entertainer. So I think they kind of used each other in a way. Like, okay, just kind of summing it up. I think they kind of used each other a little bit, and made it a friendship. But we know 50 Cent's history. He's just, I guess you would say, he's stubborn. I'm not gonna say he's self-centered, but he's pretty much, he likes the attention. And I don't know what the beef was between him and Floyd to try to remember it. I do remember that, of course, after the Cotto, he did, the jail time, he came out, and then I think that's when shit hit the fan and they just lost their friendship or whatever it was. I know now I don't know if he's still in it, but I know he's promoting, he had his promotion in Bellator as well, MMA. So they had him in the crowd. He was there. I don't remember what fighters he was promoting, but just offhand, I do remember him like in 2018, 2019. Having his hand in the Bellator, in the Bellator. But I just think at the time, I think they just kind of used each other's power or each other's following. Back then it was the influencer, what they call them now. So they were both very influential back then at that time. So I'm trying to remember more of it, but that's just kind of what I remember. I do remember, of course, them beefing, over the years. Floyd can't read. Tell him if he could at least read the Dr. Seuss book. He'll donate money or he'll do the bucket challenge, which was funny. It was funny stuff. So that's kind of what I remember about it.
Yeah, and he didn't last too long. And then after that, Jay-Z decided to get into it. So 50 Cent got out of it, and Jay-Z got into it, and he signed Andre Ward for a brief moment. He also signed Miguel Cotto, and this is what 50 Cent had to say about Jay-Z getting into it. He went on record telling BET that he thought Jay would not succeed in the pugilism wars. He said, "I think they're going to clean Jay up," Fitty said. "The sport of boxing is going to clean him up, and he's going to find out it's not like any other portion of business that he's been involved in. You can't just buy your way into purchasing existing companies and stuff like that," he said. "You look at the roster of fighters, you have to have experienced people around to run it. But boxing is like the fur coat business. We don't know how much they actually sold the jacket for." And I think that's a good point. I remember when Jay-Z came into it, some people on YouTube were coming out saying like, "Oh, this is great. Listen, Jay-Z, he's in the entertainment business. He knows entertainment. He knows about going to different states and selling out venues. He knows what it takes. Plus, he's famous. Like, he's going to bring attention to these fighters." And, well, we know what happened. Like, he's not around anymore. From what I was reading, it seems to me like he kind of faded out as soon as Cotto lost to Canelo. That seems to be the time frame of the articles like when I read them, like that's kind of like when he had his last stint with kind of being a head promotional figure for specific fighters. Like he never really got his brand going too much from what I can remember, but he was very famous at the time. And him and Beyonce are still considered to be like, oh my God, they're in the crowd. Like they're super famous, right? They still make it a big deal. But back then he was even more famous and it really didn't seem to make that much of a mark. And I always think that there's been a correlation between like the hip hop industry and boxing. Like there's, you could sometimes hear lyrics of boxing in rap songs. There's always kind of been a little bit of a connection. But it really didn't do too much for Andre Ward or Miguel Cotto, in my opinion. Mayweather got a little bit of that before, and even people who were dissing Mayweather, like Rick Ross or other people, from what I vaguely remember, it's not my game. I don't know that much about it. But 50 Cent did make the prediction that Jay-Z wasn't going to do well, and sure enough, Jay-Z's no longer in it either. So this is another case of somebody kind of dipping their toes in the water. But we're talking about people who actually signed names, and Jay-Z more so. He signed some big names at the time. Andre Ward was undefeated. Miguel Cotto was a little bit on the downslide, but he still was the defending lineal middleweight champion. And he was a big name for all intents and purposes. Miguel Cotto at the time, I mean, he did very well in pay-per-views with Floyd Mayweather, with Sergio Martinez, with Canelo. He was definitely a formidable name, but even they couldn't keep it going. Ron, what do you think about Jay-Z and his brief stint as a celebrity boxing promoter back then?
I really don't remember too much about it, but it just seemed like he wanted to come in the game, sign some big names, and thinks that he could just, that's how you gain legitimacy. But it's not like you're buying a franchise in like the NFL, or you're buying where you have a group of people usually buying something up, or like the MLB, NBA. Boxing's so unregulated. It's hard for you to, I feel like, break through, because it's all based on who you know and the connections you have. It's just not the money figure you have. And he tried, and obviously it didn't work. And then he still has Rock Nation. He has other I'm pretty sure they have other athletes in different sports, so I'm sure they're doing fine in that respect. But regarding boxing, it didn't really work out. Like his main guys were really just Cotto, Andre Ward, and then he did offer Broner a pretty lucrative deal that he turned down. I think Broner wishes he took that deal. But besides that, I mean, he might have just trying to just diversify the portfolio for Rock Nation, and didn't work. And compared to the other guys that he was representing, it probably wasn't that much money compared to the money that he was giving guys advances in the other sports, or supporting them managerially. So, or from his agency representing them. So, I mean, he tried and it didn't work out, and I think they just moved on. Not a big deal.
Oh, yeah. And while we're talking, sorry, George, did you want to add something?
No, I was just going to say, yeah, I pretty much agree. I mean, I agree 100% with Runner on that.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to talk about as far as like fame influencing boxing, like we've seen much bigger stars show enthusiasm towards boxing. And to me, I don't know if it moves the needle all that much. Like Maluma, he has way more Instagram subscribers, way more YouTube subscribers, very influential. I mean, this guy is a friend of Canelo's, plugs Canelo on Instagram, also did an intro for him in Miami, I think, right? He also was in the Royal Rumble just a little while ago. It kind of went understated, but he was there. Or it was Bad Bunny, or one of those two.
I think it was Bad Bunny.
Was it Bad Bunny? Okay. Disculpa me. All right. I'm saying it's like, but Bad Bunny is also right up there as far as like the list of influencers. As far as what I was looking at, he very, very influential. A lot of Latin American artists are. I was actually quite surprised when I was looking at the list. Like Shakira's up there, J-Lo's up there. And in my mind, like, even though J-Lo's more my era, like when I see her, I don't go, oh my God, that's J-Lo. I mean, if she was doing a live concert right now, I probably wouldn't care that much, So fame is very interesting, and its influence on boxing. I think it is a factor, but I think it has its limitations, and boxing ultimately needs to stand on its own. The product needs to stand on its own. But I mean, there are people who utilize it, like Ryan Garcia. Ryan Garcia is probably one of the most famous social media stars in boxing. And he told Gervonta Davis this. He said, "You're not a bigger star than me, dude. I'll suck up my ego and say 50-50. And you all know the argument. Ryan Garcia saying, hey, man, I got more fans. We've heard that before. We heard Devin Haney tell Teofimo Lopez that, like, oh, I'm more famous than you. I got more followers. And people were making fun of Devin Haney about that. But now Ryan Garcia is saying, yeah, you might be doing the pay-per-views, but I have the followers. So I'll suck up my ego and say 50-50. George, what do you think about this statement?
I guess in a way, I mean, it's 2022. I mean, why? I guess that's just how it's going to be from now on. I guess, who has the bigger following? Yes, you're a pay-per-view. You're the pay-per-view guy. You bring in the boxing viewers. I bring in the following that people follow me, even though if they don't know, they probably couldn't even remember the last guy Ryan Garcia fought. They just know it's Ryan Garcia. And I think that's just, I don't know, like to me, it's still kind of 50-50. I mean, if we're going to go boxing, I think I wouldn't say 50-50 because obviously we know Gervonta Davis career, I guess, speaks for itself. Even though he's not fighting the guys we want to see him fight, I would say that he's fighting the better competition. So if we're going to say, well, it's boxing, we would think that Gervonta Davis should get the bigger share of it. But we know pay-per-view is about numbers. So the number game is Ryan Garcia brings the numbers, he brings the following. So that, I guess, would make sense in a way, 50-50. You bring in the boxing, I bring in the following. So, I mean, that's the way I guess sum it up. That's what I think, man.
Run, what do you think, brother?
I mean, I think the big thing that I think about when I look at like guys that are big on social media, or if they're just social media stars, like Jake Paul, is that how many of, I wish they had a metric for how many, if like they filled out a survey with how many people never watched boxing before they saw these individuals, and how many are watching, like continue to watch boxing. If they had metrics like that, then you'd be able to actually see how big of a star, how big of an influence they have. Because if not, if they're just these one-off events that they increase the viewership of their single event, and then that's it, then I don't know if they're really benefiting boxing. They might say that they're stars, but it's sort of hard to get those metrics. And even if you have those metrics, like if you have it in pay-per-view, how do we even know anymore if those pay-per-view numbers are legitimate, or if they'll ever release the pay-per-view numbers? And then the first excuse is automatically, oh, the illegal streams, the fire sticks, the piracy. That's the first excuse. Where it's like, how legitimate is that as an excuse? Like we've talked about in the past, like black boxes in the 90s. So is it really that, or is it really that they're just not really they're enough of a star to fulfill the attention span of like flicking through social media, and then maybe them liking their picture or getting their pictures commented on, but maybe not to sustain an audience for a 3-hour pay-per-view card or a 3-hour boxing card. So it's really hard since we don't really have all the metrics to actually track that. But I mean, for this statement, Ryan Garcia, I would say Ryan Garcia is much more popular than Gervonta Davis. I mean, that doesn't mean he's a better boxer. He's better in the ring, but I would say he's probably more popular than Gervonta. I mean, Tank, what did he do? It was 250,000 buys, and then what was on the last one? We don't even know, right? His viewership. So Ryan Garcia hasn't been on pay-per-view, but it seems that he seems pretty popular, and it seems that even whether it's some of the boxing channels that go and report from his fights, it seems like there are a lot of people there, particularly females, that don't watch boxing. They're only there to see Ryan Garcia. So it's so hard to tell, but I would say probably Ryan Garcia is bigger star than Tank.
I would agree with that. And I think Nando does too. He's coming in with some sarcasm. He says, Tank sold 54,000 buys.
54,000.
That's a pay-per-view star. I mean, that's what I got to say. Like, he's not a star. He's never been a star, especially after we started getting numbers from people like Canelo. Like, then you know for real, like who's a star and who's not. Although he doesn't do that bad comparatively. I think boxing is just not doing that well in general. But it's like I've always said, unless you do a B-side and win, like it's hard to just become like an A-side superstar. Like you have to make those sacrifices and take those big fights. Dude's 27 and needs to get going. And then Nando also says, all that shit PBC gave Crawford and Top Rank, and Thurman did 40K pay-per-view buys. I heard about that, like under 40,000. Serves him right. I mean, I don't know who they thought was going to buy that. And I agree when people say, wait, we need to start boycotting these pay-per-views. Like we need to start letting the industry know that we're not going to put up with this, because if we do put up with it, then they'll keep doing it. And they're just conditioning us. When they start putting Luis Ortiz on pay-per-views as the A side, like, dude, it's not good, man. And like, are we really going to spend that much money? I mean, do we really like boxing that much? I know I don't. I'd rather jack it before pay for it. You know what I mean? And Nando says pay-per-view for these types of guys is shrinking the audience. It certainly is, man. Like, I have a lot less casual boxing fan friends than I used to. I used to have more during like the Canelo Triple G. I think I had like 30 people, and it's like less and less people show up, even though they typically only know who the A side is. But I mean, some people actually do know who Tank is. Sometimes they go, oh, that's Floyd's dude, right? That's kind of how they know Tank. But otherwise, people pretty much just know Canelo. I think Charlo benefits from having a twin. So it's kind of like, well, if you kind of know one of them, you kind of know both. Like, oh yeah, the Charlo brothers with the hair, right? I mean, that's how you remember them. But like, I think it's pretty interesting when we talk about Ryan Garcia. I would have to say that he is a star on a certain level. And as you guys know, there's been some news that he's come out and he's left the Reynoso camp. Things are changing, man, as they do in life. And well, this is over with. Seemingly on good terms, according to Ryan's posts. It seems like they're still on good terms, but Ryan Garcia has left to go with Joe Goosen. Run, what do you think about this separation, man? And what do you think about his reconciliation as far as like a trainer-fighter relationship with Joe Goosen?
I mean, only Ryan and his team and his manager will probably know what's best for him. If it wasn't a good fit for either party, then that's probably what happened. Or like there are other things you can think about too. Like was it like what you hear about? Was it Teofimo Lopez joining the camp, or was it just Ryan Garcia not wanting to train as hard, or was it just not a good fit, or wasn't getting enough attention? It could be many things, but we just don't know about. But Ryan Garcia, going back to Joe Goosen, I mean, Joe Goosen seems to be a solid trainer, more of gaining fame in the 90s, early 2000s, but being involved in boxing through his brother and his family for decades and decades. And then I saw that earlier today, or it was reported on Boxing Scene that Milnecki, the PBC fighter, I don't know if you guys know him, Milnecki. He fights out of New Jersey, but he was with Joe Goosen for 2 fights, and then he went back to New Jersey, and he went to back to his old trainer. But he announced that he's going to be moving to San Diego to train with Ryan Garcia out there. So Joe Goosen gained 2 boxers, like quote unquote, Milnecki's a prospect. So he might be building his camp out in San Diego. Ryan Garcia might be starting his own team because who knows what other boxers he can get over there. So, I mean, I would have liked to see him stay with the Canelo's team a little bit longer, but if it wasn't the right fit on either side of the party or either side, then that's just they just have to move on and that's it. And like boxers change trainers all the time. Like it's very rare to have guys stick with the same trainer, same groups of trainers. So um, we'll just have to wait and see if this could just be that Ryan Garcia is just doing this so he doesn't have to train as hard and then just focus more on the social media. He might, because he's pretty social media savvy and has millions and millions of followers. He might be saying, "I might just fight. The social media people don't care who I fight, so I'll just fight whoever I want and just make money off the posts, and then I'll still get paid well because I'm still a draw in a sense from the promoter." And then he'll take the lowest risk fights, but he'll get the benefits of like the other people don't know. The people on social media won't know who he's fighting, so he could just keep moving forward. So only time will tell.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, I guess you're reading. I mean, we obviously go on the boxing channels or boxing internet, and you see it's little stories here and there that come out. Teofimo said maybe, hey, you know what? Maybe I had something to do with him wanting to leave the Team Canelo, Eddie Reynoso as a trainer. And then his dad comes out saying, well, we want Ryan to be like the center of attention, and saying, well, we had to pretty much train when it was on Eddie Reynoso's watch. But it's kind of like work. You have a guy that's kind of new. You want to see what kind of drive he has. You want to see him learn. You want to see him take the initiative. And maybe that's what it just was. Maybe Eddie wanted to see him take the initiative, especially because of last year. He only fought once last year. I guess one episode was the depression, the hand injury, calling out fighters, I'm sure. And, Canelo, I think, was trying to be respectful about it. I mean, as far as like dirt and stuff, I don't think any fighters or trainers will actually really come out if there was like a beef, like a real, real beef there. But I think at the end of the day, they do respect what Ryan Garcia wants to do. He is a grown ass man. He could do what he feels. But Dan, Goosen, he actually trained him. I think it wasn't even, I don't think he was a professional yet when he had trained him. And I think the last major fighter that I can remember, Goosen trained, and I looked it up and I couldn't see if it was anybody else, was Sergey Lipinets against Boots Ennis. And I think that was like one of the last big ones that he trained. But he does like online videos as well as fitness, learning how to box. He does, he stays in boxing, but I think it is a weird move right now, especially when he's got to fight with it, within 8 weeks. We don't know what that would do for him. I mean, it is a change in camp, two different perspectives. I do think he will take a little bit of what he learned from Reynoso and going into Goosen. So maybe he doesn't have to teach him too much. I mean, I think we all agree that the major points obviously is the defense, the chin up, you chin in the air, throwing punches, the footwork. Hopefully in those 8 weeks, maybe Goosen can work on him and tighten him up a little bit. But when I look at it, I feel like it's kind of like the brat thing. I feel like he's kind of being the brat, not saying that he's, his dad's saying it too, that he wanted to be the main attention, and they feel like he has a big enough following to be able to go on his own and be his own brand. And yesterday I was listening to one of the channels, I can't remember which one it was, but he made a good point. Was like, well, Floyd took, he took that leap on his own, but Floyd was so much more further ahead in his career. He was already a champion by the time he left to decide to make his own brand. But it's different now, right? Because I mean, again, back to the influencer thing, back to the social media. I mean, even if he doesn't fight the people we want to fight, I just feel like his social media following or him being a social media star will help him, get to a certain point in his brand. But I just, like, for us boxing guys, we don't see it that way. We want to see him fight obviously the best, especially him calling out so many names and didn't show out. Jojo Diaz actually, I guess, well, okay. Anyways, Jojo Diaz, one of the guys he was supposed to fight. He didn't fight. Same thing with I can't even think of the name right now. But Jojo Diaz ended up fighting Devin Haney, and then he ended up fighting the other guy that he was supposed to fight. So I think everybody's kind of tired of the whole running the social media. I'll knock this guy, I'll knock that guy out. I'm a bigger star, this and that. But we'll see what happens, man. I don't know. I think we just got to sit and wait to see what this actually does for him moving to Goosen this soon with the fight coming up.
Oh, yeah. We're going to find out shortly, man. I'd like to give a shout out to Sonteo Medios in the house, man. Thanks for joining us. We got knocked out by Ken. I'd love to have him on El Chile soon. And he says, I think Ryan has the popularity to start a gym and a training team, even if he doesn't step up and start fighting the greatest. He has a huge social media following, and he inspires non-boxers to box. Yeah, I have to agree. I think that he could bring up like a younger generation of boxing fans. And I'm talking about much younger. Sometimes I've seen him sign autographs for kids. Like, I think he's a kid, but like we're talking like 10, 12, 8 years old. Like, he is influencing the next generation. And if he gets big, I mean, could be a big deal. And to a lot of his fans, like, they're not going to know any opponent from the other. All you have to do is slap some kind of fake title on him, like they do with most fights these days. Like, I watch a Showtime card or a DAZN card, and it's like, I didn't even know this was some title fight. And it's not a title fight. It's like a fake belt trinket fight, and then knocked out by Kenny. Says, great thumbnail. Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate it. It was just a shameless clickbait thumbnail. I've seen all kinds of false headlines these days, and I thought I'd have my own. Maybe start a little beef between Jake Paul and 50 Cent. We'll see how it goes and if it picks up any traction. But I think this move with Ryan Garcia and Joe Goosen, like, to me, it's just whatever. Like, I do agree with you, George, and RMPMC, but this idea that, maybe he just was kind of being a bit of a baby. Like, I kind of resonate with that a little bit. Like, I think that he was getting good work with the Reynosos. I think that the influence he was getting at that gym was positive. I understand that he had his own demons to face, but if he does want to do his own thing and he's already comfortable with Goosen, then it is what it is. Like, if he's trying to have Goosen fill that co-trainer role along with his father, I'm fine with it. All I can say is that I've always liked Joe Goosen as a boxing personality. I like his commentary. I really like his corner work in general. I used to like him more back in the day. George, you were mentioning more recent fights of his, and the one that comes to mind for me was Areola versus Ruiz, and he had Areola in the corner. And in my opinion, it just wasn't the Joe Goosen that I remember. Like, I remember Goosen used to march his fighter forward for better or for worse. He was kind of like the white Robert Garcia, in my opinion. And, he was just telling Areola, even though he had knocked down Ruiz and the fight, I mean, it wasn't close. I had Ruiz winning, but I mean, Areola had some rounds in the bank, And he was just saying, "Oh, be careful. Okay, we're gonna play it smart now coming up." I'm like, that's not the Joe Goosen I know. The old Joe Goosen would have said, "You need to go out there, you need to knock this dude out, you need to bring it to him." So like this safety first Joe Goosen, like I'm not sure what that's about. Maybe he has some guilt about the way certain fighters have come out after training with him. Like I'm not sure really what that's about, but I do think that he's a very knowledgeable trainer, has great corner work. I don't know so much about his actual training in the gym, but as far as his corner work, I've always thought it was pretty good, and I do like him. And that'll be it. We'll see what happens with the Reynoso team splitting up. And Run, we were talking over the phone, man. You made it sound like, maybe Valdez is doing his own thing. Like, what were you picking up on when you were looking at his social media?
Yeah, I was just seeing recent posts that Fight Hype, Fight Hub posted, and Valdez, I saw like he was talking about him kicking off his camp, and he wasn't training at the Canelo gym in San Diego. He was training at I looked, zoomed in, it said House of Boxing. So I went to social media account, and it seems like even the post that or the story post, or I don't know if it was a real post that he had on his social media, he was training at the House of Boxing again. And then I looked, he was doing road work yesterday with one of his sparring partners. And that guy was just training at the House of Boxing. And for the last few posts, and no post outside of like posts like remembering like, oh, 2021 recap post had anything with the sparring partner being at the Canelo's gym as well. So it was interesting. So I mean, maybe it's because Tiafimo's coming over there, and then he might Valdez might be eventually looking to move to lightweight or upper weight classes. Just thought that, or yeah. And then I see Santiago said, yeah, the House of Boxing is in San Diego. Santiago would know he's down there, but I just found it interesting that he's not at the Canelo gym, which seems like he was exclusively there. Plus, or he split his time, Valdez, because Canelo I think owns a gym down in Mexico as well that Valdez sometimes trained at when he was down there. But it's just something I caught. I mean, it might mean nothing, but it was just interesting that he wasn't at Canelo's gym and just posting videos from there. But who knows?
You got any opinion on that, George?
I mean, I've been seeing some of his videos, him hitting the bag, a little bit of road work. But I mean, his fight's in April. That's like a month and a half from now. I think, to stay busy, kind of like the pre preparation for him to be ready to come into camp. Maybe that's what it is. I mean, I guess I wouldn't overlook it in a way, because you never know. Maybe there is some kind of jealousy adding more people into the camp, Tiafimo and then possibly Virgil Ortiz. But I really don't see Valdez with that kind of demeanor. At least I don't think. But I think we'll see him actually close in on camp once the fight gets closer. I say like the last 6 to 8 weeks, I would think.
Good call, man. We're not up to that 8-week mark. So it's possible that when it does hit, that he might go over to Reynoso. Maybe he's just kind of keeping fit. Although I don't know why he wouldn't get work in San Diego at the Reynoso camp, but who knows? I mean, maybe Eddie Reynoso's got his own thing. I don't know if that gym opens up when he's not around. Like, we don't know the ins and outs. Maybe one day Santiago can shed some light if he's down there checking things out. But Scott Brown is here. Thank you for joining us. And he says, maybe PBC Goosen is helping Garcia get a tank fight. Hey, could be. And
Wow.
you know what? It could have something to do with what JC is saying here, that maybe everyone is leaving because Teo's dad is coming, and they said, oh, hell no. And that's the thing, man. We've been hearing about it, that possibly Teofimo Lopez might be joining Team Reynoso. And he says this. He says, it might be because some news about me and Eddie, referring to the break between Ryan Garcia and Reynoso. To be continued. We'll see. My father is always going to be my main coach. So there might be some kind of link there. I mean, at the very least, it looks like there's been some type of discussion going on. What do you think of this matchup run between Teofimo and Reynoso getting together and joining forces and coming out? And what do you think about that?
I think, like I've said before, regarding Sean Porter and some other father-son duos, I think it can only be positive. I mean, just as long as you keep expanding your arsenal and learning new things, I think it'll always be positive, especially Tiafimo, who does have good skills, but for the most part really relies on his athleticism. And when that isn't there, like we saw in the last fight, he was, I mean, no offense to George Kambosos, but he was getting really picked apart by someone that is quote unquote an inferior boxer, maybe not skill wise, but overall package wise to him. So maybe if he can learn to gain some more fundamentals and pick up some things from Canelo and Eddie, I mean, I think that can only be positive for him. Whether his dad's his main coach or not, maybe is Eddie going to be in the corner, or is he just going to have his camp there and sort of pay Eddie Reynoso just money to sort of just advise on things. That remains to be seen, but I think it could only be positive for Teofimo Lopez. Like, it's also when thinking about Santiago mentioned in the chat that he's talking about Manny Robles. It's like Virgil Ortiz Jr. and Senior. It seems like Virgil Ortiz Senior is going to be the head trainer, or is Manny Robles? We don't know. Maybe Santiago can shed some light on that. But it's like the Ortiz camp moved from. I mean, we talked. They've talked about this at great length, but they moved from Joel Diaz, learned what they want to learn from uh, him and Antonio, and then they moved to Robert Garcia, learned what they had to learn, and now they're on to Manny Robles, and they're probably that he probably won't be with Manny Robles for the rest of his career. So it's really just if they could pick up things. So I think it could be positive, but personality wise, who knows? Who knows how that will go down?
Mm. And Nano Yamas here says Teofimo needs a reboot regardless of who the new trainer is. And I agree with that. I think there does need to be a change for Teofimo Lopez. And Kenny says something that I want to touch on. He says, the one thing that always bothers me about the Reynoso-Garcia relationship is the language barrier and how it looks as if they are never understanding each other, LOL. Yeah, dude, I've seen the dad translating in the corner, and it's like, there's just not enough time for that, in my opinion. And possibly, to me, like, I do think that Ryan Garcia should at least be able to understand Spanish on some level. I mean, Joe Goosen knows more Spanish than Ryan Garcia. And that's kind of embarrassing, man. It's like, well, you say you got the blood, and it's like, I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm fluent, but I definitely at least understand it. And Teofimo does understand Spanish. I've heard him speak in interviews. Like, he's not the best, but you could tell he certainly understands it. If he could speak as well as he does, and he can certainly understand direction in the corner. So, and I've also heard him talk to Canelo in Spanish. So he definitely tries, and it goes a long way. And he still kind of has a swagger when he talks Spanish. He's not just trying. Like, you could tell he knows the language, for better or for worse. And you could tell it's been spoken in his house too. His dad's very fluent, of course, in Spanish. Like, you just wouldn't know it because he speaks in English and he comes marching around talking all kinds of shit in English, but he could talk Spanish too, So I'm also of the opinion that I think this would be an interesting and beneficial change. Any change would be beneficial for Teofimo Lopez. And I do think that there are some parallels between how Reynoso could train Teofimo Lopez and the way he trains Canelo and the finished product that we see with Canelo. I think that the days of Teofimo Lopez being that big guy are gone. He's going up to 140. He's not that tall. So him being the big man, hitting the guy with a stick like he did with Lomachenko, like, those days are gone. He's going to be fighting people his size. And I think he's also going to get a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, but he's not going to get any taller. Like, he's going to be fighting people with taller and longer dimensions, kind of like the way he did with Nakatani. Like, kind of in that, and if you look at that fight, it's kind of like the way Canelo and Callum Smith fought each other, right? So he's going to have to get used to a style that allows him to come on the inside and throw his power punches and reserve his energy. I do think that he is athletic, like Run PMC said, but to me, like, he's more of like a power puncher. He's a little bit more selective. He just doesn't throw and throw and throw. Like, he's really selective. And so he's going to need to learn how to come in and do some real damage and take control of the fight. And I think that Eddie Reynoso would be a great guy to show him that. And he would benefit from even having Canelo around just to show him some pointers in the ring. And Canelo's not shy about doing that, So, like, I'll look forward to seeing if they do link up. Will Teofimo's dad have some kind of effect on the whole relationship? I mean, I think it's possible. Like, maybe they'll feel it out. But I think Eddie Reynoso, he doesn't like that much bullshit. So, they might have a discussion ahead of time. George, what do you think about all this, man?
Yeah, I agree with everything everything you guys both said. I think it's a good fit. I'm not gonna say that Teofimo fights exactly like Canelo, but Teofimo, like you said, he's not like really too much of an aggressive fighter. Like, he's pretty selective, which makes him a counter fighter. And I think that would be a perfect style for him. Just look at the evolution of Canelo, right? That's kind of how he ended up being. He can choose in between whatever he wants to do. He can bully you, he can box, he can counter you. And I think that Teofimo being young enough and athletic, they would fit perfect for him, especially him going up to 140, because now the 140-pound guys will be able to take those one punch shots that would normally probably put a guy away. I think it just meshes good for him, and it's going to be very interesting to see exactly how Teofimo Senior and Eddie Reynoso can communicate, or not communicate, but just bond, I guess you could say, and see where this relationship goes. It's a good fit. I'm pretty. Actually, this was said a couple of weeks ago, and I was pretty excited about it. I think it's a good move for Teofimo, and I think first things first, like you said, he's got to find something within himself. I think maybe there's a couple screws loose, something mentally where he needs to do a reboot. And I don't know who said it in the chat, but yeah, it's right. I think he definitely does need a reboot and try to figure some things out before getting ready to step into a camp like that big of a camp, being, you know, with Team Canelo and your trainer is Eddie Reynoso. I don't see no issue. And Kenny's right. I think the language barrier for Ryan Garcia and Eddie was, you know, it was tough to see, because imagine he got into a fight where, you know, you need to feel the emotion of Eddie Reynoso, and then your dad is right here in your ear trying to translate what Eddie Reynoso is trying to say. So I don't think it would resonate as much as if he understood Eddie Reynoso.
Cosign, man. And Nando wants to know if we think Golden Boy is a bit relieved that Canelo and Ryan have split. I think it's possible, you know. But then again, I think Oscar kind of misses Canelo in a way. Did you guys all see him at the Caleb Plant fight? He was just kind of like obscure, like left of center, just kind of like with the shades. He was there. I think he misses Canelo, so he could have been like, "Hey, Ryan, you know, how's Canelo doing?" Like those days are gone, you know. So I think there might be some relief, but I mean, I don't know, man. I think that those two things should be separate. I think that if you're training with a good trainer, I mean, I understand there's some bad blood between Canelo and Oscar, but that should have nothing to do with where Ryan gets his training done. Although I do think it's a factor. And then Hard Times is in the house. Thanks for joining us. He says, Teo will never go with Reynoso. Teo will never part ways with his dad as his main trainer. Reynoso will not and should not put up with Teo Sr.'s nonsense.
Absolutely.
Well, that all remains to be seen, man. Because I agree, man. Like, no time for pendejadas if you're running an elite training camp. And Nopal Boxianos is in the house, and he's got his scorecard a little bit later. And he's also got some comments, too, about some stuff. And I'm going to read them off. And let's get into it. I want to read what he has to say right here. He's got, oh, dang. Okay, so this is what Nopal Boxianos, one of the members of Al Chile, who will be joining us again next week if you all miss him. This is what he has to say about it. He says, this is about Ryan Garcia's split. He says that his split from Team Canelo simply proves the point that time is a very valuable asset, and these trainers are being spread very thin. Although Ryan Garcia is a valuable fighter, and he's got to understand the impact that his mental weaknesses have had on others' lives, and that it has directly affected other people's lives. We live and we learn to suck our feelings up, because it's not worth risking the loss of our true support system and people who really care about our well-being. We don't know that at actual details, but what we do know is that if Ryan had decided to stay active, or at least came back sooner, things would be all good. Coach Goosen is a good trainer, but he also trained or babysat that waste of time, Chavez Jr., for one fight. That's a bad sign, because no self-respecting serious trainer should ever put up with that. Side note, Freddie Roach, he kind of wastes his time with Chavez Jr. as well, and I always thought that's a bad reflection. So good point, Nopal. And he also finishes up with saying this. He says, I mean, you need a payday that bad that you're going to relax your standards for a guy like Chavez Jr., who's known to run his own script? Shaking my head. Bro, I hope Ryan isn't going to get worse. I truly hope Goosen is strict with Ryan. Well, I co-sign a lot of that, man. Does anybody have any final thoughts before we move on to what happened over the weekend?
No, good point. Good point. I agree with Nopal there. We want to see, of course, the better, you know, what benefits Ryan Garcia, because he is a talented young fighter. So at the end of the day, that's what we want to see him do well.
Oh, yeah. All right, man. Well, let's head over to England, where we had some stuff go down. Get the right slide here. Bam! We had Danny Jacobs versus John Ryder, and John Ryder wins what some people consider to be a controversial decision. Let's start off with you, George, man. I want to know, did you watch this fight? Some people are screaming robbery. Yeah. What do you think, dude?
I think the only robbery here is Daniel Jacobs robbed himself. That's what I think. And yes, you know, I texted you, I think the day before. I was like, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to end up changing my choice here. I think Ryder might be able to pull this off. And you know, moments where it looked like he was going to get Daniel Jacobs out of there, I think after like the 8th round, you know, Jacobs looked pretty bad. And typical Jacobs fashion, does extremely well in the beginning, and then I don't know if he loses interest, or is it just, you know, the age is starting to show on him, or just maybe just losing interest in it. But Ryder was a good tough fight. I didn't watch it twice, and I didn't score it, but I definitely thought Ryder won a good majority of the second half of the fight. I think Daniel Jacobs put enough early rounds in to win a really close decision. And that was my original choice, was Daniel Jacobs winning a close fight. So I don't know if I want to brag that John Ryder won on my decision, and me changing my decision. So, but I guess the only thing I feel that was robbed was Daniel Jacobs robbed himself of a more convincing win.
All right, and Run. Did you watch that fight, man? I know you had some strong opinions, but I don't know if we discussed it to an extent as to whether you classify it as a robbery. What did you think about this fight, brother?
I thought Jacobs won because I had him on my card winning 116 to 112 because I had him winning the first 6 rounds, and then I had him winning just 2 more rounds after that. And I would say that I wouldn't necessarily classify this as a robbery, but at the same time, I thought it was a clear win for Danny Jacobs. But like George said, he just shot himself in the foot with this fight. He just can't keep performing like this and just expecting to get decisions because honestly, even though it was like a really boring fight, not this one, the one he fought Rosado, I thought he lost the Rosado fight. And then they just gave it to him, and it's like people were criticizing Rosado for not throwing enough punches. It's like I thought he just Danny Jacobs just lost the fight, and like this is might be an unpopular opinion, but I really haven't thought much of Danny Jacobs in all of his career. And with a few isolated events, like I thought he was more like I said, this isn't a disrespectful to Danny Jacobs in any way in his personal life, but I think after the Pirogue fight, which he got people forget he was knocked out cold in that fight, and he got up a little. He wasn't cold, but he wasn't responding. They waved it off, and he was acting like he wanted to continue when he was on his back on the canvas still from the overhand right. But since then, he was more of just a story. Like he has an incredible story with the cancer survival and the big tumor that was wrapped around his spine. I'm not detracting for that. I'm just saying his career for me was more of a story. And like he did have good performance against Triple G. I think a mental lapse led to the knockdown and his loss. But after that, I thought he lost the Derevyanchenko fight. I thought he underperformed in the Canelo fight. And then Chavez Jr., he was getting worked by Chavez, and Chavez just quit. Rosado fight was not impressive, and then this fight was impressive. So I think he should have won. I still had it 116, 112. But at the same time, like I'm not surprised when you like he was it seemed like even after the fight that he was fine with the loss. Like he's over there smiling, hugging Ryder right after decisions. Like there's a difference between being a good sportsman and being satisfied with being defeated. And I think Danny Jacobs really like there's nothing left for him. Like he should retire. And there's just the last few performances just have been. It seems like he's just half-assing it in there. He's not giving. I mean, maybe that's all he has, and if that's the case, then you need to retire. Or if you're just half-assing it, no one needs to watch you anymore, and please retire. So that's what I think about it.
Damn. Well, you've always had that line on Danny Jacobs, and hey, man, you're proving yourself right, and I'm glad you're giving yourself some credit for it, brother. And Nando here says, Danny Jacobs, Mikey Garcia, same. Strictly paper chasing, heart's not in it. I got to agree with that. And Philly Irish Drew Evo is here from the Shoe Shine. He says 8-4 Jacobs. He had a great episode last night with Dave. I recommend you guys all go check it out. And Hard Time says Jacobs knew going in that this may have been his final chance to stay in the conversation. He needed to do something above and beyond, but he didn't. It was a close fight, and that doesn't cut it. And that's what I have to say about it as well. Like, I think that Jacobs did know it was his last stand, and he was even talking about getting in the ring with Canelo again or getting those great fights, and that this was that next step. And I'm ready, And I did predict Jacobs to win. I bet money on Jacobs, and I lost. And I have to say, even though I predicted Jacobs and I lost money on this, like, I don't think it was a robbery at all. Like, I did have Jacobs winning 7-5, but I did have enough swing rounds to give it to Ryder. And sometimes, to be fair, for the sake of being fair, like I think I favored Jacobs a little bit because I was hearing robbery. Like if I scored it again, I easily could have just had it for Ryder. I don't think this was a robbery. I think that Jacobs did start off very well, but in my opinion, I think that those early rounds were kind of competitive. It's not like Danny Jacobs was just going in there and just taking it to Ryder. Like I thought that Ryder was doing a good job. On top of that too, like there were a lot of things that I didn't like. You could hear the game plan that Andre Rozier had for Jacobs. He was telling Jacobs in real time, you could hear like, hey, stand your ground, push this guy forward, right? And it was the opposite. He couldn't stand his ground. So you could tell that it wasn't Jacobs' best life to be on the back foot boxing. Like that's not really what he does, but he was forced to go on his back foot. On top of that, I felt like he was clinching way too much. Like I don't know Danny Jacobs as a clincher. And this fight is a great example of how just because you're the bigger guy, like that doesn't necessarily mean that you're the stronger guy. Like I felt like in the clinch, I felt like Ryder truly was that 168 pounder. Like Jacobs, even though I always considered him to be a bigger guy, and I thought, oh, this is great, he's going to fill into 168. Like I don't know, he kind of seemed lanky and less strong in the clinch. And Ryder was busy on the inside trying to get some work done. And I did have Jacobs winning this fight, but I thought that Ryder did a lot of good work. definitely not a robbery in my opinion. I always think of Danny Jacobs as a classy guy, so I was kind of surprised that he didn't stay for a post-fight interview. But it might be over for him. Maybe he tried to have a return to form type of return with Andre Rozier in his corner and, willing to go overseas. And you can actually hear some of the crowd actually rooting for Jacobs. He just didn't have it, in my opinion. And this might be the end. A lot of people are calling for his retirement. I could see how some people might think that's premature because he's still got a lot to offer. But also, when you start seeing somebody who's clearly not in their prime anymore and starting to slide, like, you just don't want to see that keep happening. And it's like, well, where do you fit him? I mean, a lot of 168 pounders don't want to fight each other. He's not somebody who necessarily generates. Like, I don't know where you could have him fill out an arena, right? So it's like, I don't know. Maybe he could be a gatekeeper. I mean, maybe he's ready for the Berlongas and the David Morrells. If he's interested, he probably could take them with the experience that he has, but maybe not. I mean, I think those would be good fights, but I think those are the only fights that would include Danny Jacobs that would be entertaining. Does anybody have anything else on that?
And I was going to say that too early when you asked me. There was a couple early rounds that were swing rounds, and like we said, Ryder looked like he took control of that second half of the fight. And let's just say Ryder won maybe one or two of those early swing rounds going into the second half, and maybe the judges were swayed by, look at, what, Ryder looks like he wants to fight more, and it did look like Jacobs was clinching a lot. So maybe they were already influenced by, like, he's holding a lot. I think they probably just gave him maybe like a couple extra rounds at the end because the scores were close. It was a split decision. So maybe that's what happened where the judges were swayed with the activity. Like, because you could tell Ryder was definitely trying to make the fight. He was trying to win some of those rounds. Of course, a little bit of exhaustion. Danny Jacobs holding on. And I agree. I think, like Kenny said it yesterday, he had it on his back screen. The gloves were hanging up. I think it's time for Danny Jacobs to hang it up because Danny Jacobs is a good guy, man. Like, you can't hate his backstory. Like, me knowing someone in my family that's dealing kind of with the same cancer that he has, like, I guess you pull into his story and you kind of feel for him. But I would hate to see him be a gatekeeper. But then again, that's kind of what someone at his stage in his career do is, I don't know, they may give him some money in the back end, like, hey, look, we want to really see where our fighter's at. Will you take this extra money? But I think it is time for Jacobs to hang it up because this win would have put him somewhere in that conversation actually to contest for a title. And I think that just shot him in the foot. I don't think there's anything left for him.
Right. And will he have the will and the desire to go through another training camp for like a lesser fight? I doubt it, man. I mean, he might be very comfortable, and I hope he's enjoying his money. I mean, he made a lot. His net worth is a lot more than most of these boxers. He made a lot of money off that Canelo fight as well as his DAZN contract and what he did previously, man. Like, he had a really good career in general. Definitely a multi-time titleist. So we'll see what happens. And, I guess we're going to be able to follow this as time goes by. I know he did make a offer to Jamal Charlo, and Jamal Charlo wasn't interested, but I mean, who knows? He might be interested now. I mean, Jamal Charlo might need a dance partner, based on what happened. Like, he might not get that Canelo fight. You know what I've noticed, man? Like, it's kind of weird. Like, I've gone a lot of consecutive weeks without talking Canelo. And this is the first time I've ever talked about Jake Paul. First time I've ever talked about anything close to women's boxing. So, I mean, there's some firsts going on here. But we're going to get back on the Canelo train as soon as the fight's announced. Maybe we'll get into it next week. Yeah. But, hey, we're going to stick to England.
I have one more thing to say about Jacobs.
Oh, sorry, Ron. Yeah, no, man, go ahead. Yeah, like, your homie, your favorite Jacobs, go ahead.
I just want to clarify that my critique of Danny Jacobs is only with his performance in the ring. This isn't talking about him as a person. It's really just his performance in the ring. I just haven't really been satisfied with his recent performances. I'm like George said, he seems like a nice guy. He seems like a stand-up guy, except the stuff that happened with him and Rozier, but they seem to have ironed that out. So they've let bygones be bygones. So I don't think we can really judge him on that anymore. And it just, yeah, but I wasn't satisfied with his last performances. And like Danny Jacobs had a good career, especially like his backstory coming back from what he dealt with. And I think with his best win being Kid Chocolate, I mean, there's nothing to hang your hat about, even the guys he fought and lost to. I know he beat Derevyanchenko, but I thought he lost that fight. So I'll say Kid Chocolate is his best win. But yeah, I mean, if he rides off in the sunset or if he gets a Charlo fight, who knows? Like, maybe he needs the name. Maybe he's a guy that fights up and down to his competition and needs a name in front of him to to turn it on, because when he was fighting Sergio Mora, granted he stopped Sergio Mora, but he wasn't that impressive. But when he fought Kid Chocolate, even though Kid Chocolate we saw how his career went, he stopped him in the first round, and then he did come up. He did fight well against Triple G too. So I thought he underperformed a little. He could have led to some not underperform. I thought he had lapse of concentration that led to the knockdown, but maybe he just needs to fight. He needs to go up for his fights. So who knows? But if he retires, then good on his retirement. Seems like he has all his faculties still, and I'm sure he probably has his finances in order. So it wouldn't be bad to see him go either.
Good call. And like you said, Ron, like this has nothing to do with him personally, just assessing his boxing inside of the ring. I think we all can agree. Like he seems to be a very classy guy, respectful dude. So I think we're all just kind of, at the very worst, indifferent towards Jacobs. He's just kind of there. You know what I mean? And knocked out by Kenny says that Boo Boo and Jacobs should fight. Battle of the older elusive guys. Boo Boo would probably win that based off of his performance last night. Hey, man, that could be a good one, man. And then, oh, man, Hearn paper chasing Ryder versus Canelo. Yeah, I don't even want to touch on that one, man. Like, I would not be too happy with that, but Canelo has earned the right to do whatever the hell he wants. But speaking of England, man, we're going to keep it England and talk about this upcoming fight that we got going on. I'm actually excited about this one, and I'm hoping that you guys are too, and are at least willing to talk about it. A grudge match coming to fruition, finally. They're both shot, but it could make for an entertaining fight. We got Amir Khan versus Kell Brook this weekend. George, let me know what you think about this fight. Who do you have winning this one?
A good headline yesterday was a little too late. And yeah, I mean, I guess it's a little too late, but I think it is going to be an entertaining fight. I mean, even though they're both beyond their prime, I still think it's going to be an entertaining fight. And I am picking actually Kell Brook to win this. I even saw some comments about Amir Khan saying that he doesn't think Kell Brook's chin can handle it. I mean, we've only really seen him get hurt or actually get, I guess, stopped was against Terrence Crawford. I mean, yeah, he took some orbital shots, broke his orbital bone twice. And then I saw a comment yesterday. Someone put it's the chin versus the whose chin can hold up the eye, or who can hold up the chin or the eye. So I guess maybe that's the other thing that we'll see. Whose chin will his chin go first or will his eye break? But I'm going with Kell Brook in this one. I could see Kell Brook maybe like a mid to late stoppage.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually looking forward to this fight, even though it would have been much nicer to see these guys before they both got stopped. Kell Brook by Triple G and then Amir Khan by Canelo. I think if you made this fight back in like 2016, and it would have been for Kell Brook's IBF welterweight title that he won off Sean Porter, I think that would have been an awesome fight to have. And they could have just like sort of stayed in their lane. Like they could have just been, this is for a title fight, and then maybe the winner gets a shot at whoever the welterweights at the time I think at the time it was Keith Thurman had 2 belts. I don't remember correctly, but it could have been a big fight back then. But now, I mean, I'm still excited, but I'm sort of torn on who I want to. Like my gut says, I disagree. I think Amir Khan will win, but I don't know anymore because Kell Brook, like he like his eyes are messed up. He won by Triple G, won by Errol Spence, both broken orbitals, and we saw that. In those fights, whether it was his corner or whether it was him, he quit in both those fights. But then I was like, I used to say like Amir Khan, like he never quits, but he quit in his last fight against Terrence Crawford. So it's like I really don't know who. So I think the eyes versus the chin who's going to hold up. But in the last fight, we saw that Kell Brook's chin betrayed him, and it was at welterweight. And I know Chicano Prophet has some more on a rehydration clause, so he can touch on that. And Kell Brook looked really gaunt after the weigh-in when he fought Crawford. So, and this is also at welterweight, I believe. So, who knows how he's making the weight too?
Hey, that's a good call. And then Nopal, he's chimed in with his prediction. He says, "Well, I hope that Brook KOs Khan, but as usual, Brook looks like he just got out of chemotherapy." Damn. And Drew Evo says Brook's gonna win by KO in 7 rounds. I mean, I think that's where I have it too. Like, although I'm not going to put any money on this fight, as you can see, Brook is almost a 2-1 favorite, but I do like this fight. I still like it, but they're both shot to pieces. And I am concerned about that rehydration clause. It's something that I saw, and not too many people are talking about it, but Amir Khan said, hey, that's not my business. But yeah, from what I understand, there's some kind of rehydration clause. And on top of that, Khan was already giving Brook a hell of a time at their press conference saying, "Hey man, look at you. You're not going to make the weight. You look too big." And then, Kell Brook's like, "Don't worry about me, man. Da, 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 da. I'm going to knock you out." So, I mean, they truly don't like each other. So I'm excited that this is a legitimate grudge match. And I think that they both really want to win. Like, I understand, like, if they lose to Crawford, but they were supposed to lose. Like, how much shame is there in losing to what some people consider to be the number 1 or 2 pound for pound fighter in the world, the defending champion? Like, you had no business going in there anyways. Neither of them did really, right? But this one's about pride. It's about island pride. They're going to have to live in the UK for their days. And I don't know, man, like, this could be like the last way to kind of put that nice stamp on your career, like that finishing touch on your legacy. But hey, at least, I beat my rival, right? So I think this is a good one, but they're both shot. I do think that Kell Brook is also chinny, but I think people are making a little bit too much about Khan's speed. I think he does have the hand speed still, but I don't think he has the ability to throw flurries and come in like he used to. Like, I used to be impressed with the way he would come in on people. Like, he just doesn't do that anymore. He maybe will have like 1 to 2 punch combo and then just try to tie up. Like, he's not one of those like 3-4 punch and then get out type ambush fighters. He's not like that anymore. Like, I think maybe he could connect once, but I think Brook has enough in him to take advantage. I think he's going to be stronger on the inside unless he's drained, but Kell Brook did make that decision himself. So I'm not going to touch this one as far as like betting goes, but if I had to guess, I would say the advantage is to Kell Brook, as the odds indicate, but it should be a good one. And how long will Khan hold up? Like, I mean, it's just a matter of whose chin will hold up whose chin will hold up longer. And I'm actually excited about this one. And I think if you're like my age demographic, like, I think that you're going to be interested in this one in general. Like, I don't know. We'll see. That's my take on it. I'm actually excited about this one. There are grudge matches that we don't get sometimes. And this one wasn't a big deal, but I mean, I always wanted to see the Brandon Rios versus Victor Ortiz grudge match. Never saw it. So at least we're getting this one, better late than never. I mean, if they can put Victor Ortiz and Robert Guerrero together, and they weren't necessarily enemies, but they were kind of coming up at the same time. And that one had my interest, and this one still has my interest. So I'm going to be paying attention, and, congratulations to both guys. I mean, they really don't have to take this fight. And Amir Khan, he keeps, I don't know, maybe it's like an A-side thing, but he keeps telling Brook, like, "Hey man, I don't need this fight. I'm doing this for you," kind of thing. But it could just be some head games. Like I said, there's some pride involved, and I'm excited. Does anybody have any final thoughts on this one before we get to our controversial rescore?
No, I think I'm just going to go with Khan with my gut. But like I said, when I was talking about it, I'm sort of unsure it's going to be who breaks first, because not to detract from when Oscar Valdez fought, because I picked Valdez to win, but when Valdez fought Burchelt was drained, and we saw it like in the first round when he got wobbled by it was sort of just like a lead left hook that hit him like on the top of the head. He was wobbled, and then Valdez picked him apart and stopped him. But the weight definitely makes impact in the weight cut. So we'll see if he knows how to rehydrate and recomp properly. If not, who knows? Who knows what happened? I'm going, I think, Khan. That's who I'm leaning towards.
Nice, man. And I think this is D-Style representing the HCP Boxing Network. Thanks for joining us, brother. And he's got Khan winning this one. So we'll see.
I was wondering who that was.
I think it's got to be, you know what I mean? I need to get some access to that account or something. And then, yeah, dude. So we're having a good time, and we're going to get to our controversial rescore segment. This one was one that I was actually like excited to watch based on the fact that it was a 30th anniversary of this very controversial fight that we were just putting off. Like, we had this list of which ones do we choose, and we just never got to James Toney versus Dave Tiberi. I really didn't know much about it, but once I did some research on it and I watched it, I'm upset that I didn't know about it earlier. This was one heck of a fight to watch. And to set the stage, we got the one and only Run PMC. Run, please take it away, brother.
All right, great. So this is pretty topical, like we talked about last week, that a week ago was the 30th anniversary of this fight. So this fight took place February 8th, 1992 from the Trump Taj Mahal in Atlantic City, New Jersey. So really iconic place for those 90s fights. And this was James Toney versus Dave Tiberi for Toney's IBF middleweight title. And this was Toney's fourth defense he was making from the belt. And this is the belt he actually won from Michael second to none when he stopped him really in a spectacular and iconic stoppage in the 11th round. And then Angelo Dindi ended up, I think, stepping in and calling this fight. But then surprisingly, when I was looking at this, because I've never seen this fight, I wasn't even alive when this fight took place. But James Toney, this was his fifth defense or his fifth fight in 9 months. And then Toney would fight 6 times in 12 months. So really really speaks to Toney being like a boxer's boxer with staying active as much as he was. And as you see on the screen, at 23 years old, like you really don't see the activity among those guys. Six fights in a 12-month period at 23 years old. That's really a throwback fighter. And Toney was coming off for this fight his controversial draw against Mike McCallum, which was only 2 months before. And entering this fight, Toney was a 10-1 favorite over Tiberi. But on the broadcast, as you guys heard, is that some sports books in Atlantic City weren't even putting out odds for this fight because it was such a mismatch. Tiberi, a relatively unknown fighter from New Jersey, came in with a 22-1-3 record, and this actually was his last fight as a professional, just from the result of this fight. And it's Tiberi, I was reading an interview that he gave years later. He said that he was offered fights with Sugar Ray Leonard or Roberto Duran, but turned those fights down in favor of this fight because he wanted to fight. He viewed those guys as being way out of their prime and didn't want to fight guys out of their prime just to gain a name. He wanted to fight a prime fighter because he really had, from reading the interviews, he really had strong belief in himself that he could be at the top of the middleweight division. Um, funny, Shikana Prophet put me onto this, but he said, and I end up finding articles that Bernard Hopkins and the and IBF champion at the time in the light heavyweights, Charles Williams, were the chief sparring partners for Tiberi during this when he was training in Philadelphia. So he said that they all studied film for hours and really picked apart Tony's style, and that's what really led to his success in this fight. Um, so this fight, the reason that we're watching this is it's very controversial fight. So um, without, I mean, we're going to go over it. So James Toney ended up winning this fight by split decision. One judge had it 117-111 for Dave Tiberi, and the other two judges had it 115-112, both of them for James Toney. And it was sort of an interesting thing when I was watching the scorecards being read. James Toney was like, I don't know if he was on his stool or was kneeling in the ring with his manager Jackie Kalen, and he looked like he was very worried that he was going to lose the fight. But then when the scores were read and he was read in his favor, he was sort of still out of it. And then Jackie Kalen was smiling, sort of like, I told you, like, it would work out. And as I was reading an article that was talking about going back, Randy Gordon, the chairman of New York State Athletic Commission, stated before the decision was read just how he knew the fight how it was. He's like, it's probably going to be a split decision, and we know how that works when you are the promoter's fighter. You could get a split decision or some sort of draw. Usually, if it's a fight that you should have lost or should have been a draw. So it's interesting hearing the chairman of the New York State Athletic Commission saying that. And then also this fight prompted from Senator William Roth. I looked it up. I couldn't find if he was actually related to the boxing judge Jerry Roth, but the Delaware senator called for an investigation that took place in 1992, and it revealed that the investigation revealed that the two judges that were in favor of Toney were actually not licensed in New York or New Jersey to judge. So they weren't actually licensed to judge at the time of this fight. And it said that there was a note in there that Larry Hazard Sr. who was head of the New York, I guess it was the New Jersey sanctioning body or commission, that he noted during the investigation that the referee was viewed as incompetent. And he was still given this fight. So it's really interesting backstory, especially since there was a very controversial point deduction. And then Dave Tiberi they were offering a rematch, but for some reason I couldn't find why he didn't accept the rematch, and he only earned $26,000 for this fight. But his rematch, he would have earned up to $500,000 for the rematch. But for some reason, whether it was his morals or not, the fight didn't come to fruition. I guess he was a part of 8 years later when the Muhammad Ali Boxing Reform Act was passed in 2000 by President Clinton. This fight was one of the reasons that they wanted to stamp out more corruption in boxing. So he seemed in his retrospective interviews that he was satisfied with the change he made for the sport, but you could obviously see that that this fight really changed the trajectory possibly of his life and definitely his boxing career. And that's sort of the things you see, that some of this stuff, at least this is my view, that, and I think a lot of people share it, is that just because boxers might not be the biggest star or they might not deserve this decision, these are other people's lives being the challengers or the contenders that might not get the things, and it changes people's lives. They're like $500,000 back in the early 90s too is life-changing money. I mean, it's life-changing money now, but if you think about inflation back then, like that's in the mid like 1.4 $1.5 million back then possibly. So it could have been life-changing money for him, but it seemed like Dave Tiberi was very active in his community later, and some sort of leadership roles back in Delaware. And then I found an interview from 2009 on Fight Fan from Fight Fan TV and FightFan.com where James Toney actually admitted that he believes he lost that fight and that he was given decisions, but he thinks he was cheated off in other decisions and other things just from the corruption in boxing. So James Toney actually admitted that he thought he lost this fight. So we'll get on to the scorecards now, but how'd you have it, Chicano?
Thank you very much, Ron. Well, dude, let me start off by giving y'all what Nopal had to say. He's going to warm us up, and I think his comments were interesting. So we'll start with him, brother. And he says this: he scored it 7-5 for Tiberi with 5 swing rounds. He gave Toney round 1, 6, 7, 9, and 11. He says it was very hard to score, although Toney was very tired. He stayed in the fight, and it was interesting to see Tiberi using Toney's lack of energy as fuel to keep him going. Clearly, an off night for Toney. And then I asked him, but do you consider it a robbery? And he says, no, because Tiberi was a bum. His enough just wasn't enough. So that's what Nopal has to say. So we can mark it 1 under not a robbery, but he did have it for Tiberi. What do you think, George? Tell us about this fight, man. Like, how'd you score it?
It was, I don't know what stream you guys watched or what video you watched, but it was very nostalgic. I remembered some of those commercials. It almost made me want to go buy some tidy whities. I don't know about you guys. It was pretty much sponsored by Fruit of the Loom.
Yeah, dude.
There was the Mike Tyson trial still going on too, so they were mentioning the Mike Tyson trial happening right after. But back to the fight, we mentioned it earlier that I remember James Toney, of course, but I didn't really follow him. I was younger, so I followed whatever my dad did. His 2 favorite fighters at the time were Mike Tyson and Chavez, but I've always heard the name James Toney. I just didn't really watch it. But watching this fight, man, apart from the scoring, I was very impressed with James Toney, and I actually went back to go watch some of the fights, like the Iran Barkley fight. I mean, for me, I think that was like his best performance. I think he landed over like 60% over 9 rounds. So James Toney had obviously, what it took to beat Tiberi. There was him, of course, exhausted. I think after maybe like 2 rounds, he was leaning a little bit on Tiberi. He was using the ropes a lot, which could give off the impression of him being hurt. Tiberi was actually answering back, and I didn't know that part about having those people in his training camp. Now that makes so much more sense to me that Tiberi had an answer for pretty much everything that James Toney had in this fight. And James Toney flashed in moments, like they said, he's struggling with weight. I think it was 160 or no, 158. He was struggling to make that weight. 23 years old, 5 fights in 1 year. That is a throwback fighter. We don't see that anymore, especially that young. And maybe it's because we see the effects of how some of these older fighters ended up. They look, that just comes with the sport. The punch drunk, the slurring of the of speaking. Maybe those are the reasons why some of these younger fighters want to keep their faculties at the end of their career, because they see how some of these older guys end up, at least 10 years after they retire. But James Toney was definitely a throwback fighter. As far as the scoring, my swing rounds were 2, 5, and 9. With me giving pretty much the swing, I gave James Toney 1 swing round, which was the 5th. And then the other 2 rounds, of course, I gave him to Tiberi. At the end of it, I had Toney winning 1, 4, 5, and 10, and I had Tiberi winning 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, and 12. So my final score, I had Tiberi winning 8-4 rounds. It was unfortunate that Tiberi didn't, continue on with his career. I thought he seemed like he was a decent boxer, but I feel like, some of these no-name guys have that one fight in their career that just sets them apart, and the next fight doesn't show up, just like Buster Douglas after knocking out Mike Tyson. It's like that was the fight he trained his whole life for, was to fight Mike Tyson and beat him. And then the very next fight against Evander Holyfield, he loses. And then, of course, Tiberi does not fight after this. This is his last fight of his career, was against James Toney, at least what I've seen in Boxing Rec. Was it a robbery? I'm going to go ahead and say yes. I think it was a robbery, 8-4. And was it James Toney weight drained? Was it the 5 fights a year that he did that he was doing? Maybe, but I think that was just the story with James Toney. His whole career was him not really taking the training serious, and struggling with weight. That's how he ended up being in a heavyweight towards the end of his career. But robbery, yes, I would say robbery. I had Tiberi winning 8-4.
All right. Thank you very much, George. So we're 1-1 right now as to whether it's a robbery. George has it as a robbery. No, Paul does not. Run, PMC, please, man. Tell us what you thought about this fight.
I mean, first time watching this fight, and I think I'll just say before I even say my scorecard, I think it was a robbery. Um, I think Toney gassed after round 3, and then really after that, it was just intermittent bursts of Toney just trying to rally, and he was landing good punches. But I think those little 15, 30-second rallies were just they were it was overwhelmed. Like he was overwhelmed by more of just the being outworked from Tiberi's work throughout the entire round. That's what I think. And I'll say my scorecard. I had a 10-2, 117, 110 for Dave Tiberi. I think the points in the fight that were important was that James Turdy stunned and really hurt Dave Tiberi, and then even after the when those interviews I was reading, is that Tiberi said that's when after the first round when he was buzzed, but he said he wasn't really hurt, but he was sort of wobbly. But he said I felt I could take his punch, and then his confidence rose so much from that, and you really saw he started laying it on Toney in that second round, and Toney, like I said, was gassed in the third, and then there was another controversial thing in the sixth round was that Dave Tiberi was deducted for low blows right after Bill Miller, legendary trainer, who is James Toney's favorite trainer. He stated is one who's taught him most everything in boxing. He told the ref round before, in between the rounds, he watched the low blows. Next round, without a warning, he was deducted a low blow. But the thing was, he wasn't deducted in the round. He was deducted in between the next round, which is sort of odd to me because I don't know. I don't get how you can even do that because that's like, could you imagine like in football, like you want to challenge a play and then like a few plays later you get the challenge and then they overturn the play. It's sort of an odd thing to me that you could wait that long for something to happen like that. But I had yeah, and then even Toney got time. I mean, this was the glove was ripped, but they replaced Dave Tiberi's gloves and they replaced both gloves, even though one glove was flawed. I don't know if that's a thing that athletic commissions to do. If one glove has a rip in it, they replace both of them, but they ungloved Tiberi and regloved him in the round. And then Toney was getting more. He was just that was like a 4 or 5 minute delay. So that's major recovery time. Granted, I think Tiberi won. I love watching James Toney, but I just thought he got outworked in this fight. And yeah, I'd round 7 and 10 or 7 and 12 close, both going in favor of Dave Tiberi. So even if you were to take this away, I still would have had it 8. If you were to give Toney those close rounds, I would have had it 8-4 for Dave Tiberi still. And I just think Toney, what people loved about James Toney, his activity in his career, and it was also his downfall that he was always in the gym, but he's openly said like in later years that he only liked to really spar, and that was his main thing. He didn't like road work, he didn't like bad work, he didn't like mitt work. He liked sparring, and he liked doing speed bag. It doesn't mean he didn't do those other disciplines throughout his boxing career, but he said if it was his choice, he would just spar and do speed bag, and that was it. So I think maybe coming off a fight that he looked good in Mike McCallum, I think he might have this only being 2 months apart. He might have just taken a little time off in the gym, maybe got lax with the diet, and came in and said he's going to steamroll this guy that he was a 10-1 favorite at bet or at worst against. And then and then Dave Tiberi was training like this is the fight of his life, and with the help of one future champion and one current champion in the training camp, I mean, this is the results you get. It was like a cherry pick gone bad. But for Toney, he might not have looked at it as a cherry pick. It might have just him being staying active and getting a paycheck. So it is what it is. It sucks that it happened, but I had Tiberi clearly winning this fight, and I classified it as a robbery.
All right. Thank you very much, Run PMC. All right, man. Well, you know what? I thoroughly enjoyed this fight as well. You know, I thought the pace of the fight was pretty interesting, you know, and I did think something was wrong with Toney once we started getting into like even like third round. Like I started thinking, okay, well, this isn't the James Toney I know. Like before this fight, I watched the Mike McCallum fight, and I got to say, James Toney is one of my favorite fighters to go back and watch. I love his style. His upper body movement is just out of control. His counterpunching ability and his toughness. I really should watch more of his fights, to be honest. But this is the first time I've even even heard of the Dave Tiberi fight when I listed it as a possible controversial fight for us to go back and rescore. So I watched the fight for the first time, and I had this 7-5 for Tiberi. So I had Tiberi winning this fight. I thought Toney did good initially with flurries and then kind of conserving his energy and then using powerful punches to dictate the pace. And then Dave Tiberi just started coming on. I was very impressed with Dave Tiberi for being what, they would classify as like a club fighter who had no business maybe even being in the ring with a champion like James Toney. Man, he had no fear going in, and you could tell that something was wrong with James Toney. It was not the James Toney that we're used to seeing. But Tiberi did a really good job of making the most of it. Like, he would come in and he would get aggressive and get on the front foot. And I could tell there was a point where James Toney started getting gassed. And he kind of went to the center of the ring to say, like, I'm James Toney. I'm going to stand my ground and bang it out. And even with that, Tiberi marched Toney backwards. So I was really impressed with that as far as like owning the real estate of the ring. Dave Tiberi did a really good job of that. But I found James Toney kind of do some of the more meaningful counters at times, also finishing up rounds strong, not necessarily stealing them, but like they were both tired at times. They were both kind of doing that phone booth type fight. And I thought that James Toney was doing a good job of really laying the leather on Tiberi. And I think there was a power disparity. And I still had James Toney losing this fight by a round. I do think that there was some controversial circumstances. Like you mentioned, Ron, I did think that that point being taken was a bit bizarre. I don't know if that was like corruption or, like you said, maybe this guy had no business reffing, and maybe it was just like he couldn't rise to the occasion of a championship fight. And he just made a quick decision, a brash decision, and boom, deducted that point. I don't really know what the circumstances were. And on top of that, the cold glove thing, it did give James Toney a chance to recover. But I don't necessarily think that this fight was a robbery. I gave James Toney rounds 1, 7, 9, 10, 11. But I think that you could conceivably give him round 2. I think you could conceivably give him round 12. I think that perhaps the crowd got caught up in what was going on. I think sometimes when you see somebody has no business being in the fight, actually being in the fight, sometimes I feel like they get a little bit more credit than they deserve. I'm not saying that that's what you guys saw, but I'm just in my mind. I think I've seen more controversial fights be declared robberies with not as much attention. But I think the fact that this was such an upset in the eyes of the audience, because people were shocked that this guy was even standing a chance against James Toney, that I think it maybe gave him a little bit of credit. He was winning the spirit of the fight. But if I was to break down the rounds, although I had Tiberi winning, I wouldn't necessarily classify it as a robbery. So it looks like the Chile Crew is split on this one. Although I did think this fight was entertaining, man. So let's open it up a little bit. And if you want, we could talk a bit about this fight, about the dynamics of it. And just if anybody has any final thoughts on this one before we close up this episode. What did you, any final thoughts on this particular fight?
Yeah, I have something to say is that I think I'm trying to like rationalize how you could give James Toney rounds. And I think it might be the how hard his punches, how clean his punches when he did land were what they were compared to Tiberi's. But I just think from scoring a fight, I think Tiberi's just overall volume it just overwhelmed Toney's even power punches. And clearly like power punches are great, but it's like also they weren't hurting Tiberi either. So the way I just score fights is that, I mean, obviously I try to score just the one I think is winning based on the criteria. But if you're landing a few power punches here and there, if you're hurting someone, staggering them, then okay, you could have more merit. But if your power punches are landing cleanly and they're not hurting you or hurting the opponent, then you just have to look at it a little bit differently, because a power punch is just anything but a jab. It's not like they have like some sort of like what they were trying to do with Triple G, put the little like power gauge in his glove and so it's really hard to evaluate that. But I think Toney sort of like I was talking to Chicano about this. I think when he was up against the ropes and him trying to roll shots made some of the shots actually look worse, because it looked like he was getting hit and flying back, even though he's just riding the shot out. But like, even like you see in the pictures, even in the center of the ring, he was getting pieced up by Tiberi. And I think like this might not be the worst robbery. I did classify as a robbery, like, but I think a worse robbery like that we've covered was probably Paul Williams versus Erislandy Lara, in my opinion, because the clean shots Lara was landing, and Williams would land shots, but they were like, he was landing like flurries to the body, but they weren't all clean. So I think maybe that might be classified as a bad robbery, but I was really disappointed in Toney's performance in this. And then, yeah, so that's all I really have regarding that.
Yeah, I agree too. Seeing James Toney's performance, it was a little disappointing. But like I mentioned, you always show up to the one fight that you were determined for, and I think having these two guys in Tiberi's camp, it just showed how serious he took this fight and how much he really wanted it. And I think at the end of it, it was Tiberi's determination, even though he got dropped in the first round, like to him still to come back. And I think I had him winning the next round. Yeah, and winning the next round after getting dropped. It just showed the determination of Tiberi. But all in all, James Toney had a good career, and we don't know if he learned from this. But I think that's pretty much what I just want to say is that that's what it was for me. It was Tiberi's determination, and some of the things, yes, where James Toney was landing some good punches, but his flurries were like really far apart from like a 10-second fury or a 15-second flurry. But Tiberi, I feel like he controlled most of the fight. The ring generalship, back to the criterias, I feel like that was pretty key for him. At least in my scoring for this fight, I felt like he had more of the ring generalship, and to the very last bell or in the 12th round, he still looked like he could have probably went 3 more rounds if this was a 15-round fight.
I totally agree with a lot of what you both have to say. And that's typically how I view like scoring fights as well. Like when you were kind of making that comparison run between like this fight and then perhaps the Paul Williams versus Erislandy Lara fight. So I totally get that. And as far as what you're saying, George, I also agree. Like, I do think that Tiberi did show good ring generalship. He was doing what he wanted to do. He wanted to be on the front foot, and he was able to back up his opponent. And I have said that owning the real estate in the ring does count for something, but I also think that clean punching also counts for something. All I can say is that when I was watching the fight, like I thought there were a lot of punches that Dave Tiberi necessarily wasn't connecting very cleanly on. Like I think he was kind of busy, but I didn't necessarily see him. I mean, at times, I definitely had Tiberi winning this fight, and I think it's close to a robbery, but I wouldn't classify it as a robbery. I think Tiberi should have gotten the nod, but just watching that fight, like I have to say, like, the idea of Tiberi rolling with some punches, I could see that, but I also just think he was hitting him more flush in general at times, enough to possibly get enough rounds to possibly get the benefit of the doubt. Also, if you're talking about like what's going on back in the day, there might have been more of that idea of like, you need to take it from the champion. Now, like I've mentioned, like my thoughts have evolved. I don't necessarily think that you need to take it from the champion anymore, but I don't know. Like, I think if a round's really like razor tight, like maybe you could give it to the champion, like the defending champion. It's hard to say. I'm actually surprised they didn't give Tiberi this fight in general, just because of the circumstances and how good he looked on the night, because the crowd was going crazy for him, because this outcome of how it looked in the ring was unexpected. Very good fight. But it's the James Toney that, we all know that this isn't what James Toney usually looks like. Does anybody have any final thoughts before we get on to our next subject? And the only thing I want to say too is that, I really like James Toney. When I was watching this fight, I ended up doing a little bit of a palate cleanser and watching the Mike McCallum fight, the one that preceded this. And when I was watching this, I thought to myself, okay, well, hell, I'm not scared to say it. James Toney beats Canelo Alvarez. And then I watched the Tiberi fight and I was like, well, depends on the night. So I want to get into it, man. I want to know what you guys think. James Toney versus Canelo Alvarez, like off the top of your head, if you have some knowledge about typically the fighting styles, play it out in your head and tell me what you think. George.
Yeah. That one right here, this little topic kind of throws me off a little bit. Offhand, shit, it'd be a very good fight because James Toney, good movement. And as long as the James Toney of Tiberi doesn't show up, if we fantasize about this fight happening, of course, Canelo his power just in general would have been enough, but this would have been a crazy good fight, man. The movement, if 100% James Toney shows up to a Canelo fight, shit, I would have to agree with you on that, Chicano. I would have to slightly edge James Toney, just the movement, the footwork, rolling with punches, and being able to move around in that ring. And not that Canelo's flat-footed, but I think it would. Man, I don't know. I would slightly favor James Toney in this one.
Damn. And No Ball has chimed in. It looks like we're swinging it towards an official. Al Chile Robbery says he's switching his pick. Run PMC made some good points. and on the 5-minute and the point deduction. So, hey, man, we can classify this one as a robbery. But as far as James Toney versus Canelo goes, Run, what do you think about this one, man?
Um, like I touched on last week, you see like bouts of inconsistency in James Toney's performances and how well conditioned he comes into fights. And I think that was also shown by his how he climbed the weight classes so much, was that his maybe lack of discipline, or maybe he just felt stronger fighting at higher weights. But I'd say if you put Canelo Alvarez, who might be at the pinnacle of his career now. We don't know yet because you have to see some slide to see if you're at the pinnacle. But if you say his last, if it was Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders, and then you put them in like prime 168 James Toney, so Iran Barkley, I think Toney has the edge, just from his defensive ability and to be able to just counter seamlessly from whether like they show him shoulder rolling, but they also show him knocking him down shots, pairing shots with his right hand and coming over the top with straight right hands, and his body work and just his overall speed. I think I think he probably beats Canelo, and I wouldn't say easily, but I think he would handily beat Canelo. But then we don't know if this is Canelo's prime yet, so it's sort of hard to tell. But I think just the combination, like I said in the chat, of speed, power, punch variation, it would be hard to beat that Toney. But then you have Toney coming in against a few fights later, not really a few fights, but when he fought Roy Jones, is that then you didn't really see that. But then I also think that's because James Toney said he was struggling to make the weight, and then he ended up moving up weight classes after that. He moved up to light heavyweight. So it's really, but like we said, we don't know if where Canelo is, but if you were to say right now, Iran Barkley versus present day Canelo, I'd have to fight, or Iran Barkley version of Toney versus present day Canelo, I'd have to favor James Toney.
I co-sign all of that, and that will be our official palate cleanser. If you want to go back and watch this one and decide for yourself as far as Toney versus Tiberi, then go watch James Toney versus Iran Barkley. I'm going to watch that one soon. I hear it's a great one. Run PMC recommends it, and I co-sign all of that, man. Just the style's too good, man, and the way James Toney can just kind of lean back and not get punched and just counter with something is just amazing. I mean, I think Canelo would have a lot of problems with that because he would try to attack the counter puncher when Canelo wants to be the counter puncher. And also James Toney on a good night can throw a lot of punches. I just wonder if Canelo's activity can hold up. Like he doesn't necessarily throw, but like, he has gone 24 rounds with Triple G, 12 rounds with Jacob. So, I mean, the guy can throw enough, but James Toney, like that's a different animal, would be one hell of a fight, but we just don't know. And then we're going to be wrapping this up, but y'all, if y'all want to catch George, man, he's got one hell of a podcast with him and his boy Julian. So click on this link when you get the chance, man. And we're just going to highlight our next controversial rescore. This is one that comes to us recommended by the one and only Run PMC. Let's take a look at it here. Amir Khan versus Lamont Peterson, Capital Showdown.
Yes.
Run, tell us,
Wow.
why did you want us to choose this one, man? Like, what are your thoughts about this one?
I think it was a topical one since Khan's fighting this weekend. It very much might be Khan's last fight. And then Khan, even though he's had his ups and downs in his career, he was an iconic name like 10 years ago, and people thought he was the next one up to be a force at 140 and eventually 147. Obviously, he didn't get the Pacquiao and Mayweather fights because he had little Danny Garcia sort of derailed that, and so does Lamont Peterson. But I think this is a good fight of where we can keep going with sort of like that East Coast and sort of possible corruption in there. You'll see some funny things going around the ring and sort of with some point deductions and some of the scorecards. So, and also besides all that stuff, it is a great fight. It is a banger of a fight with both these guys not having like knockout power, but Lamont Peterson having just ferocious style in this fight, and then Amir Khan just having the blistering hand speed at the time. So it's a great clash of styles, and I enjoyed this fight.
Awesome. George, do you remember this fight at all?
I do remember some of it, yeah, and this was it definitely from my memory was controversial, yes. And like Peterson, of course, being an inside fighter, being able to take good shots, but not having the power to really, capitalize on being able to hurt Khan. I mean, Khan back then, obviously the flurries, the 1, 2, 3s, he was really good, pretty good footwork, but he was a little predictable, and I think that's what happened in the Danny Garcia. That's why he got caught. It looked like Danny Garcia threw a Hail Mary or a haymaker from left field, but you can see early on in that fight, when I watched it again, he was trying to land that left hook. But this was a good fight, man. This would be a really good one to rescore, and I'm looking forward to seeing how, what you guys think on this one.
Great notes, man. Well, I'd like to thank the Chile Crew, and George, he's becoming a regular here, man. We really like talking boxing with him, man. So
Appreciate
I
it.
encourage everybody to take those notes in mind, like while watching this fight. I know I'm going to. So I want you all to enjoy the week, and we'll see you next week. I want everybody to take care.